The pine trees stood silent along County Road 14, their needles forming a rust-colored carpet on both shoulders of the asphalt. Evan Calder had driven this stretch so many times he could navigate it half asleep. Every curve, every pothole, every place where deer liked to cross near the creek bed. 14 years in this town had given him that kind of knowledge, the kind that settles into your bones without you noticing. His Chevy Silverado rumbled beneath him, the engine making that familiar throaty sound that came from 200,000 miles of loyal service. The truck smelled like coffee and sawdust, and the radio played low, some classic rock station out of Eau Claire that he never really listened to but always had on. Through the windshield, the October sky hung gray and heavy, promising rain before nightfall. Evan checked his watch. 3:40. He'd make it to Nora's school with 5 minutes to spare, same as always. Punctuality was something he prided himself on, a trait that had served him well as regional manager for Northwoods Lumber. People counted on him. His word meant something. The phone mounted on the dashboard lit up, and Nora's name appeared on the screen. He smiled. She must have gotten out of class early. He tapped the answer button. "Hey, kiddo," he said, his voice warm. "I'm 5 minutes away." There was a pause on the other end, longer than usual. He heard her breathing, soft and careful. "Dad." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Be careful while driving, okay?" Evan's smile faded slightly. Something in her tone caught him off guard. A tremor, a weight that didn't belong in a 10-year-old's voice. "What's this about?" he asked, easing off the accelerator as the road curved left around a stand of white birch. "Just promise me." The words hung in the air between them, strange and urgent. Evan opened his mouth to respond, to ask what was wrong, but then the steering wheel jerked hard to the left. Not gradually, violently, as if invisible hands had seized it and wrenched it toward the ditch. He yanked back, muscles tensing. The wheel wouldn't respond. "Nora." The brake pedal sank to the floor under his foot. No resistance. Nothing. The truck accelerated down the slope, and his stomach dropped as physics took over. He pumped the brakes again, harder, panic beginning to claw at the edges of his control. "Dad!" Nora's voice crackled through the speaker, small and terrified. The pine tree appeared in front of him with shocking speed, its trunk thick and dark and absolutely immovable. Evan had time to think one clear thought. This is going to hurt. Then metal met wood with a sound like thunder, splitting the world open. The airbag exploded into his face, white and suffocating. Glass shattered. The seatbelt locked across his chest, so hard he felt his ribs creak. The world spun once, twice, and then stopped with a sickening crunch. Silence rushed in after the chaos, broken only by the hiss of the radiator and the distant sound of something electronic beeping. Evan tasted blood in his mouth. His head throbbed. Through the starred windshield, he could see the pine tree's bark pressed against the crumpled hood. From somewhere far away, tinny and desperate, he heard Nora screaming his name. Then darkness pulled him under. The hospital room came into focus slowly, in pieces. White ceiling tiles, the steady beep of a heart monitor, fluorescent lights that made everything look pale and unreal. Evan's mouth felt dry as sand, and when he tried to move, pain lanced through his ribs like hot wire. "Don't." A woman's voice, professional and calm. "You've got 3 cracked ribs and a concussion. Moving is a bad idea right now." He turned his head carefully and found Dr. Mira Holbrook standing beside his bed, reviewing something on a tablet. She was younger than he'd expected, late 30s maybe, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that seemed to notice everything. "How long?" His voice came out rough. "You've been out for about 4 hours. It's evening now." She set down the tablet and studied him with the kind of attention that made him feel like a puzzle she was solving. "You're lucky, Mr. Calder. If you hadn't been wearing that seatbelt, we'd be having a very different conversation. Or no conversation at all." Lucky. The word felt wrong. He remembered the steering wheel jerking, the brakes failing, and nothing about that felt like luck. That felt like something else entirely. Movement near the window caught his attention. Lydia sat in one of those uncomfortable hospital chairs, her face pale beneath the harsh lights. She'd been crying, Her eyes were puffy and red, and she clutched a tissue in one hand. When their eyes met, she stood quickly, almost knocking over her purse. Evan. His name came out broken. She moved toward the bed, stopped halfway, as if uncertain whether to come closer. God, we thought. In the chair beside where Lydia had been sitting, Nora was curled into a tight ball, holding her worn stuffed fox, the one Evan had won for her at the county fair 3 years ago. Her face was buried against the toy's orange fur, and her small shoulders shook with silent tears. Nora. Evan reached toward her, ignoring the pain that screamed through his torso. Baby, come here. She lifted her head. Her face was blotchy and wet, her eyes wide and haunted. She scrambled out of the chair and approached the bed carefully, as if he might break if she moved too fast. I'll give you some privacy, Dr. Holbrook said quietly. But I'll be back in 15 minutes to check your vitals. She paused at the door, glancing back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then she was gone. Nora's small hand found his, gripping tight. Dad, she whispered. That wasn't an accident. The words landed like stones in still water. Evan felt something cold move through his chest. Not fear exactly, but a sudden sharp awareness. He studied his daughter's face. She wasn't confused or upset. She was certain. Nora. Lydia's voice cut across the room, sharp as a knife. Don't say things like that. But Evan kept his eyes on his daughter. Honey, what makes you think that? Nora glanced at her mother, then back at him. She was trembling. I heard Mom on the phone before you left work. She was in the kitchen, and I was doing homework at the table. She didn't know I was listening. Her voice dropped even lower. She said something about your truck. Evan's gaze shifted to Lydia. His wife stood frozen near the foot of the bed, her face losing what little color it had. Her hands had balled into fists, crushing the tissue. That's enough, Nora. Lydia's tone had changed, harder now, with an edge of panic underneath. You're confused. You misheard something, and now you're scared and... I'm not confused, Nora said quietly, and there was something in her voice that made Evan's chest tighten, an adult certainty in a child's throat. He looked at Lydia again, really looked at her. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Instead, she stared at some point on the wall behind him, her jaw working as if she were chewing words she couldn't say. Lydia. He kept his voice level calm. What phone call? There was no phone call. The words came out too fast. She's 10 years old, Evan. She's traumatized. You almost died. She's trying to make sense of something senseless. But even as she spoke, Lydia backed toward the door. Small steps, almost unconscious, like an animal sensing danger. Look at me, Evan said. She did finally. And in her eyes, those hazel eyes he'd looked into for 14 years, through proposals and vows and the birth of their daughter, he saw something he'd never seen before. Guilt. 3 days later, Evan stood in his garage, the October chill seeping through the thin walls. The Silverado sat on Tom Avery's flatbed tow truck, looking like a carcass. The entire front end had accordioned into itself, the hood crumpled, the windshield a spider web of cracks. It should have been worse. He should have been worse. Tom climbed down from the cab, wiping his hands on a rag that had probably been white once. He was a big man, 6'3", broad-shouldered, with the kind of quiet competence that came from 30 years of fixing things. They'd known each other since high school, back when this town was even smaller and everyone knew everyone's business. Jesus, Evan. Tom walked around the truck slowly, shaking his head. What the hell happened out there? Steering locked up. Brakes failed. Evan moved closer, ignoring the dull ache in his ribs. The pain medication helped, but not enough. Both at the same time. Tom grunted, crouching down near the front driver's side wheel. He pulled a flashlight from his belt and shined it up into the undercarriage. The silence stretched out, broken only by the distant sound of kids playing in someone's yard down the street. After a moment, Tom stood up. The expression on his face made Evan's stomach tighten. Show me, Evan said. Tom hesitated, then gestured for him to follow. They both knelt, Tom easily, Evan with a grimace, and looked up at the exposed brake line. Tom's flashlight illuminated clean metal where the line ended. Too clean, too straight. That's no accident, Evan. Tom's voice was quiet, careful. Someone sliced that line. See how smooth the cut is? That's not a tear from an impact or corrosion. That's a blade. Sharp one, too. Neat job. The garage suddenly felt smaller, colder. Evan stared at the severed line, his mind working through the implications like dominoes falling in sequence. You sure? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Positive. Tom shifted his weight, the leather of his boots creaking. I've been doing this for 30 years. I know the difference between something breaking and something being broken. He paused. You got any idea who'd want to do this? Evan stood slowly, one hand pressed against his ribs. Through the open garage door, he could see his house, the white two-story they bought when Nora was born, with a big oak in the front yard and Lydia's flower garden that she'd stopped tending 2 years ago. The kitchen light was on. He could see movement inside, a shadow passing by the window. No, he said. The lie tasted bitter. No idea. Tom studied him for a long moment, then nodded. He didn't believe the lie, but he was a good enough friend not to push. You should call the police. Yeah. Evan didn't move. I'll do that. But he wouldn't. Not yet. Because in a town like this, rumors traveled faster than truth, and if he was wrong about what he was thinking, he'd destroy everything. And if he was right, he needed to be very, very careful. Tom packed up his tools and left just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Evan watched the tow truck disappear down the street, then turned back toward his house. Through the kitchen window, he could see Lydia at the table, her laptop open in front of her. Her face glowed blue-white in the screen's light. She didn't look up when he came inside, didn't acknowledge him at all, just kept typing, her fingers moving across the keyboard with sharp, precise movements. Nora in bed? He asked. Yes. One word clipped and cold. Evan poured himself a glass of water, his hand steady even though something inside him was beginning to crack. He drank slowly, watching his wife over the rim of the glass. She'd always been beautiful in a distant sort of way. High cheekbones, dark blonde hair, the kind of elegance that made people in town whisper about how she was too good for a lumberman. But somewhere along the way, that distance had become something else. A wall. A fortress. Tom looked at the truck, he said casually. Lydia's fingers paused on the keyboard, just for a second, and said it was strange. Both the steering and the brakes failing at the same time. He set the glass down, watching her face. Called it a neat job. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then she started typing again. Guess you were lucky then. Could have been worse. Lucky. That word again. It rang false in the quiet kitchen, hollow and wrong. Evan didn't say anything else. He just stood there for another moment, memorizing the scene, his wife at the table, refusing to look at him, the smell of whatever she'd made for dinner still lingering in the air, the soft hum of the refrigerator. Normal. Everything looked normal. But something had shifted that afternoon in the garage. Some gear had turned his mind, cold and final. He thought about Nora's voice on the phone. Be careful while driving. He thought about the way Lydia wouldn't meet his eyes in the hospital. He thought about the brake line, cut clean as a surgical incision. That night, he lay awake in their bed while Lydia slept beside him, or pretended to sleep. In the darkness, listening to her breathe, Evan Calder made a decision. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was just a simple recognition of what needed to happen next. He would watch. He would wait. And he would find out the truth. Because if someone wanted him dead, he needed to know who. And why. And how close they'd come to succeeding. And what he'd do about it. The watching started small. Subtle things that Lydia wouldn't notice, or so Evan hoped. He paid attention to her phone. How she angled it away when he entered a room. How she carried it everywhere now. Even to the bathroom. The screen always face down on the counter, always within reach. Before the accident, she'd leave it lying around without a second thought. Now it had become an extension of her hand, guarded and secret. For days after he came home from the hospital, Evan woke at 2 in the morning to find the bed empty beside him. He lay still, listening, water running in the pipes. Footsteps downstairs. He waited 5 minutes, then eased out of bed, moving carefully to keep his ribs from screaming. The house was dark except for a sliver of light coming from under the laundry room door. He moved down the hallway on bare feet, keeping to the sides where the old floorboards wouldn't creak. He learned that trick when Nora was a baby and they needed to sneak past her room without waking her. Lydia's voice drifted through the door, barely audible. "Can't do this right now. I said I'd handle it." "No, it doesn't know anything." Evan pressed closer, his ear near the frame. His heart beat steady in his chest, cold and controlled. "It was supposed to look like an accident." "Yes, I understand that." Her voice rose slightly, then dropped again. "I don't care what you think. If you'd done it right the first time." The water shut off. Evan moved back quickly, slipping into the bathroom across the hall. He closed the door most of the way and waited in the darkness, watching through the crack as Lydia emerged from the laundry room. She stood in the hallway for a long moment, her phone clutched in one hand, her face pale and drawn in the faint light from the street lamp outside. Then she went back upstairs, her footsteps soft on the carpet. Evan stayed where he was, counting slowly to 200 before he moved. When he finally returned to bed, Lydia was curled on her side, facing away from him. He could tell by her breathing that she wasn't asleep. Neither of them spoke. The next morning was a Saturday. Nora sat at the kitchen table, working on a school project, something about Wisconsin state history that involved a lot of construction paper and glue. Evan made pancakes while Lydia sat on the couch with her laptop, the local news playing on TV in the background. "Dad," Nora looked up from her project, a streak of glue on her cheek. "Can we go to the lake today? Just us." Lydia's typing stopped. "Sure, kiddo," Evan said, flipping a pancake. "After breakfast." "Actually," Lydia cut in, closing her laptop, "I thought we could all go into Eau Claire. There's a sale at." Nora asked if she and I could go. Evan said evenly. He plated the pancakes and brought them to the table, setting one in front of his daughter. "We won't be long." The air in the room changed, tension pulling tight like a wire. Lydia stood up, her hands smoothing down her jeans in that way she did when she was trying to appear calm. "I just thought it would be nice. Family time." "Mom, you hate the lake," Nora said through a mouthful of pancake. It was true. Lydia had always found reasons not to go. Too cold, too buggy, too boring. But now she was standing there insisting, and Evan could see the calculation behind her eyes. She didn't want him alone with Nora. Didn't want them talking. "It's fine, Lydia." Evan poured syrup over his own pancakes, his movements deliberate and calm. "We'll be back for lunch." She opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, she picked up her phone and walked toward the stairs. "I'm going to take a shower." After she left, Nora looked at her father with those two knowing eyes. "She's mad. She'll be okay." Evan sat down across from his daughter. "Eat up. We'll head out soon." They drove to Redtail Lake in his borrowed truck. Tom had lent him an old Ford while the Silverado sat in the insurance company's impound lot. The morning was crisp and clear, the October sun bright, but not warm. Trees along the shore had begun their autumn transformation, painting the landscape in reds and golds. Evan parked in the gravel lot near the boat launch. There were a few other cars, weekend fishermen trying to catch perch before the season ended. He and Nora walked out onto the wooden dock, their footsteps echoing across the water. They sat at the end, legs dangling over the edge. The lake stretched out before them, smooth as glass. Evan could see all the way to the bottom near the dock, pebbles and weeds and the dark shapes of fish moving slow. "Dad," Nora said quietly, "are you and Mom going to get divorced?" The question didn't surprise him. Children always knew more than adults gave them credit for. They felt the tension, read the silences, understood that something fundamental had broken. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "Maybe." She nodded, picking at a splinter on the dock. "Because of what happened with the truck. It's complicated, honey. She did it, didn't she?" Nora's voice was small but certain. "Or she got someone to do it." Evan looked at his daughter, really looked at her. 10 years old, with his dark hair and Lydia's sharp intelligence, and eyes that had seen something that would change her forever. He could lie. He could tell her she was wrong, that adults' problems were complicated and not her concern. But Nora had warned him. She'd called him while he was driving, terrified, trying to save his life with a whispered plea to be careful. She deserved the truth, or as much of it as he could give. "I think so," he said finally. But I need to be sure. What are you going to do? The question hung in the cold October air. A fish broke the surface somewhere to their left, ripples spreading outward in perfect circles. Evan thought about the brake line, cut clean. He thought about Lydia's voice through the laundry room door. It was supposed to look like an accident. I'm going to be very careful, he said, and I'm going to find out exactly what happened. And who helped her? Nora leaned against him, her small warmth pressing into his side. I'm scared, Dad. I know. He put his arm around her shoulders, holding her close. But you don't need to be. I promise you, nothing is going to happen to me. And nothing is going to happen to you. What about Mom? That was the harder question. Evan watched a duck glide across the water, its wake trailing behind in a V shape. What about Lydia, his wife of 14 years, the mother of his child, the woman who had apparently decided he was worth more dead than alive? Your mom made some choices, he said carefully. Bad ones. And people have to live with their choices. They sat there for another hour, not talking much, just being together. When they finally drove home, Evan felt something he hadn't felt in years, a clarity of purpose. The last traces of doubt had burned away, leaving only cold certainty. Lydia was in the kitchen when they returned, chopping vegetables for something. She looked up when they entered, a knife in her hand, and smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. Have fun, she asked. Yeah, Nora said. I'm going to finish my project. She disappeared upstairs quickly, as if she couldn't stand to be in the same room with her mother. Lydia watched her go, then turned back to the cutting board. The knife came down hard against the wood, slicing through a carrot with a sharp crack. You need to stop, she said quietly. Stop what? Turning her against me. The knife sliced again. She's my daughter too. I'm not turning her against anyone. Evan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. She's scared. She saw you on the phone that day. She heard what you said. The knife paused midair. She's a child. She doesn't understand what she heard. Then explain it to me. Evan's voice stayed level, almost gentle. What did you say that scared her so much she called me crying? Lydia set down the knife. Her hands were shaking. I was talking to my sister about our anniversary dinner. About surprising you. That's all. Our anniversary is in March. A different dinner. A special. She stopped, realizing how thin the lies sounded. Her jaw tightened. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Interrogating me. Treating me like I'm guilty of something. Evan studied her face, the flush creeping up her neck, the way her eyes darted to the side. This woman who had shared his bed, his life, his dreams. When had she become a stranger? I went to see Tom at his shop, he said conversationally. About the truck. The color drained from Lydia's face. And he took a close look at it. The brake line. Evan pushed off the counter, moving closer. Not threatening, just present. He said it was cut. Clean slice, like someone knew exactly what they were doing. Both the steering and the brakes, disabled so I'd have no way to stop. Calculated. He paused. Professional. That's... Lydia's voice came out hoarse. That's impossible. It must have been damaged in the crash, or... No. The single word cut through her protests. It was deliberate. And, you know what's interesting? Tom said you were at his shop. Tuesday afternoon. The same day someone cut that line. Her mouth opened. Closed. She looked trapped, cornered. I was getting an oil change, she said finally. You got your oil changed a week before. I have the receipt. Evan tilted his head slightly. So why were you really there, Lydia? She grabbed the counter for support, her knuckles going white. For a moment, he thought she might confess, let all pour out in a rush of tears and apologies. But then something shifted in her expression. The fear hardened into something else. I don't have to explain myself to you, she said coldly. You've always been paranoid, always suspicious, always convinced I was doing something wrong. Maybe that's why. She stopped herself. Why what? Evan asked softly. Why you wanted me dead? Get out. Her voice trembled with barely controlled rage. Get out of my kitchen. It's my kitchen too. My house. My life that someone tried to take. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. The words carried their own weight. And I'm going to find out who, even if I already know the answer. He left her standing there, the knife still on the cutting board, surrounded by half-chopped vegetables. As he climbed the stairs, he heard her sob, a single, sharp sound that might have been grief or fear or rage. He didn't look back. 5 days passed. Evan went to work, came home, made dinner, helped Nora with homework. On the surface, everything looked normal. Beneath it, he was gathering evidence piece by piece, like assembling a puzzle in the dark. He found a receipt in Lydia's car. Not the fake one she'd probably mentioned to Tom, the real one. It was crumpled in the cup holder, dated that Tuesday. Services rendered, brake system inspection, paid in cash, $200. Tom's shop didn't charge $200 for inspections. Evan took a photo of the receipt with his phone, then put it back exactly where he'd found it. Lydia was at yoga, or claimed to be. He had exactly 45 minutes. Her laptop was easier than he'd expected. She'd always used the same password, Nora's birthday followed by their wedding year. Predictable. He opened her email and started reading. Most of it was mundane. Shopping confirmations, newsletter subscriptions, a few messages to her sister. But then he found a folder labeled Personal, created 2 months ago. Inside were 3 email threads with someone named David R. The first email was dated 8 weeks back. I can't keep living like this. Trapped. Small. He doesn't see me anymore. Hasn't for years. I need out, but I can't afford to leave. Not with Nora. Not with nothing. David's response. There are ways. Legal ways that ensure you get what you deserve. Lydia's reply. Divorce would take years. He'd fight me for custody. I'd end up with less than I have now. I need something cleaner. Evan's hand stayed steady on the keyboard, but his jaw tightened. He scrolled down to the next exchange, dated 6 weeks ago. I know someone. Discreet. He's helped people in situations like yours before. It would have to look natural. An accident. Insurance would pay out. You be free. Nora will be taken care of. Lydia, how much? 10,000. Half up front, half after. Evan sat back in his chair. The house was silent around him except for the tick of the hall clock. $10,000 to kill him. To take away Nora's father. To destroy a life he'd built with his own hands. And for what? Because Lydia felt trapped? Because she'd made herself small and blamed him for it? He didn't feel anger. Not yet. What he felt was colder than rage, a kind of crystalline clarity. He understood now, with perfect precision, what needed to happen. He took screenshots of the emails, sent them to his own encrypted account, then cleared his browser history. He was back downstairs, making coffee, when Lydia's car pulled into the driveway 20 minutes later. She came in carrying her yoga mat, face flushed, hair pulled back. Good class, he asked mildly. Fine. She set the mat down. I'm going to shower. After she left, Evan pulled out his phone and called Tom. Hey, you got a minute to talk? Sure. What's up? That thing with my truck. I need to know something. He kept his voice casual, conversational. Did Lydia ask you to do anything that day? When she came in, a long silence on the other end. Then, Evan, I don't think. Tom. Evan's voice hardened just slightly. I need the truth. Whatever it is, I need to know. Another pause. Tom let out a long breath. She asked if I knew anyone who could look at your truck. Off the books. Said she was worried about the brakes. One of them checked without you knowing. Didn't want you to think she was nagging. And I gave her a name. Guy I knew from up in Ashland, does side work sometimes. Tom's voice was miserable now. Jesus, Evan, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what she was planning. I thought she was just. What's his name? Ray Donovan. Works out of a garage up on Highway 53. Tom paused. Evan, if this is what I think it is, don't tell anyone we talked, Evan said. Not her. Not anyone. But the police. I'll handle it. Evan hung up before Tom could argue. He stood in his kitchen, the phone warm in his hand, and thought about Tom's betrayal. His oldest friend, the guy who'd been best man at his wedding. He'd handed Lydia the name, unwitting, innocent. But it didn't matter now. Tom had become part of the machinery that had nearly killed him. That night at dinner, Evan watched his wife across the table. She ate quietly, pushing food around her plate. Nora sat between them, glancing back and forth, reading the tension like she was fluent in its language. I've been thinking, Evan said casually. We should take a trip, the 3 of us. Maybe up to Superior, see the lake. Get out of town for a weekend. Lydia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. When? Next month. before it gets too cold. He smiled at Nora. You'd like that, right? We could stay at that bed and breakfast with a big fireplace. Nora nodded, but her eyes were uncertain. I don't know if I can get away from work, Lydia said quickly. We're really busy right now. She worked part-time at an accounting firm, 3 days a week. Evan knew for a fact they weren't busy. Well, think about it, he said easily. It'd be nice. Time together as a family. The word family made her flinch. She set down her fork. I'm not hungry. I'm going to bed. After she left, Nora looked at him with those two old eyes. You're testing her. Smart kid. What if she says yes? To the trip? She won't. Evan started clearing the plates. She can't afford to have us all together, somewhere unfamiliar. Too many variables. Too many things that could go wrong. You sound like you're planning something. He paused, holding a plate in midair. I'm being careful. That's all. Dad. Nora's voice dropped to a whisper. I'm scared of what's going to happen. Evan set down the plate and crouched beside her chair, ignoring the protest from his healing ribs. He took his daughter's small hands in his. Listen to me. Nothing bad is going to happen to you. Or to me. But Mom. He chose his next words carefully. Mom did something very wrong. And people who do wrong things have to face consequences. Do you understand? Tears welled in Nora's eyes. Is she going to jail? Maybe. Probably. He squeezed her hands gently. I know she's your mom. I know you love her. And that won't change. But loving someone doesn't mean accepting what they do when they hurt people. A tear rolled down Nora's cheek. Will I still see her? I don't know, honey. We'll figure it out. He pulled her into a hug, feeling her small body shake with silent sobs. You're safe. That's what matters. You're safe. But even as he held his daughter, Evan's mind was working. He thought about Tom giving Lydia the name. About this Ray Donovan up in Ashland. About the emails, the receipt, the cut break line. The pieces were all there. Now he just needed to put them together in a way that would hold up. Not in a court of law, not yet, but in a confrontation that would force the truth into the open. Because Evan had realized something crucial. Lydia thought she'd been careful. Thought her tracks were covered. But she'd underestimated him. Underestimated how much a man would fight when someone tried to kill him and orphan his daughter. That was her mistake. And he was going to make sure she paid for it. 3 days later, Evan drove up to Ashland. He told Lydia he had a meeting about a potential timber contract. She barely looked up from her phone when he left. The garage on Highway 53 was a squat metal building surrounded by rusted car parts and weeds. A hand-painted sign read, Ray's Auto Repair. Evan parked and sat in his truck for a moment, studying the place. 2 bay doors, both closed. A side entrance with a faded open sign hanging crooked. He got out and walked inside. The man behind the counter looked up from a magazine. Ray Donovan, presumably, mid-50s, gray beard, oil stains on his shirt. His eyes were sharp despite the casual slouch. Help you? He asked. Maybe. Evan approached the counter slowly. I'm looking for the guy who worked on a Chevy Silverado about 2 weeks ago. Black, early 2000 model. From down in the Eau Claire area. Ray's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. Evan leaned against the counter. Woman came to you. Paid cash. Asked you to do a specific job on the brakes. And the steering. Listen, friend. Ray set down his magazine. I think you got the wrong shop. I don't think so. Evan pulled out his phone and brought up the photo of Lydia. This woman. You remember her. Ray glanced at the photo, and Evan saw the recognition. The man's jaw tightened. Never seen her before. Tom Avery sent her to you. From Eau Claire. He'll confirm it. The name made Ray pause. He studied Evan more carefully now, weighing something. You a cop? No. I'm the guy whose truck you sabotaged. Evan's voice stayed calm, almost conversational. I'm the one who was supposed to die when those brakes failed and I went off the road. Except I didn't die. Just got banged up pretty good. Ray stood up slowly. He was bigger than Evan had realized. 6 feet, heavy through the shoulders. You need to leave. In a minute. Evan didn't move. Here's what I know. You took money to cut my brake lines and mess with my steering. Made it look like an accident. But you screwed up, I survived. Now I'm putting together what happened, and your name is going to come up. Police will be very interested in talking to you. Is that a threat? It's information. Evan tilted his head slightly. But I'm willing to make you an offer. Tell me everything. Who hired you? How much you got paid? What exactly you did? And I might forget where I heard about you. Might tell the police I figured it out some other way. Ray considered this. His hand moved towards something under the counter. I wouldn't, Evan said quietly. Whatever you're reaching for. I have copies of everything. Emails between her and someone arranging this. Receipts. Tom's statement. It's all documented and stored somewhere safe. If something happens to me, it all goes to the police automatically. So let's just talk. The hand stopped. Ray let out a long breath, then pulled out a stool and sat down heavily. 5,000, he said finally. She paid me 5,000. Cash. Told me her husband was abusive, that she was scared, that he'd kill her if she tried to leave legally. And you believe that? I didn't ask too many questions. Money's money. Ray rubbed his face. She gave me the details, when you'd be driving, what route you usually took. I followed you one morning from your work to the school. Figured out where you parked during the day. Came back that afternoon with tools. And did what exactly? Cut the brake line clean through. Loosened the steering column. Made it so everything would hold together until you were moving at speed, then fail all at once. He looked up, and there was something almost defiant in his eyes. It was a good plan. Should have worked. Except it didn't. Ray spread his hands. So what now? You going to the cops? Evan thought about it. About this man who'd taken money to murder someone he didn't know, based on a story he hadn't bothered to verify. About how easy it had been for Lydia to find someone willing to kill for $5,000. Not yet, he said finally. But you're going to write down everything you just told me. Names, dates, amounts. And you're going to sign it. That's not negotiable. Evan's voice went flat and hard. You're going to write it down, or I walk out of here and call the sheriff's department before I reach my truck. Your choice. Ray stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. 15 minutes later, Evan walked out of Ray's auto repair with a signed confession in his jacket pocket. He sat in his truck and read it through once more, making sure every detail was there. Then he took a photo and sent it to his secure email. The drive back to Eau Claire took 2 hours. Evan used the time to think about the final piece, the confrontation that was coming. Because he had everything now, the emails, the receipt, Tom's inadvertent assistance, Ray's confession. It was enough to bury Lydia, to send her to prison for attempted murder. But more importantly, it was enough to make her face what she'd done, to force her to look him in the eye and admit that she'd wanted him dead, that she'd planned it coldly, calculatedly, and came so close to making Nora an orphan. That was what he wanted more than anything. Not revenge, exactly. Not even justice. Just the truth, spoken out loud, with no more lies between them. When he got home, Lydia was making dinner. Something with chicken. The smell filled the kitchen. How was your meeting? She asked without turning around. Productive. Evan set his keys on the counter. Actually, I was thinking, let's take that walk by the lake. Just you and me. Tomorrow evening. She glanced at him over her shoulder. Why? Because we need to talk. Really talk. About us. About everything. He kept his voice gentle, almost sad. I think we've been avoiding it too long. Suspicion flickered across her face, but she nodded slowly. Okay. After dinner tomorrow. After dinner, he agreed. That night, lying beside her in the darkness, Evan thought about the confrontation ahead. He'd played it out a dozen different ways in his mind, but he kept coming back to one truth. Lydia needed to confess. Not for legal purposes. He had enough evidence without it. But for himself. For closure. And maybe, somewhere deep down, a small part of him hoped she'd break down and apologize. Show some hint of remorse for what she'd tried to do. But he doubted it. The Lydia he'd married would have been capable of that. This stranger wearing her face? He wasn't sure she was capable of anything except self-preservation. The October sun hung low over Redtail Lake, painting the water in shades of orange and gold. Evan and Lydia walked side by side along the shore, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path. They hadn't spoken since they left the house, the silence stretching between them like a taut wire. Nora had stayed home. Evan had arranged for Tom's wife to sit with her. One less thing to worry about. You wanted to talk, Lydia said finally. Her voice was flat, guarded. Yeah. Evan stopped walking and turned to face the lake. The water stretched out before them, calm and endless. A few ducks glided across the surface near the far shore. I wanted to ask you something. About us. About how we got here. What do you mean? He chose his words carefully. Do you ever think about when we first met? At that party at Tom's place. You were visiting your sister, and I thought you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Lydia crossed her arms, staring at the water. That was a long time ago. It was 20 years. He picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his palm. You weren't from here. You had plans. You wanted to move to Minneapolis, work for one of the big accounting firms. You had ambition. And then I got pregnant, she said bitterly. We got pregnant. Together. Evan tossed the stone into the water. It disappeared with a soft plop. I asked you to marry me. You said yes. We had Nora, bought the house, built a life. You build a life. She turned to face him now, her eyes hard. I gave up everything. My career, my dreams, my chance to be something more than a small-town wife to a lumber manager. I never asked you to give up anything. You didn't have to. Her voice rose. Just being here in this town, with you, it was like watching myself shrink year by year. Becoming invisible. Less and less until I was nothing. Evan studied her face in the fading light. So that's why you did it. The question hung between them. Lydia's expression shifted, a flicker of fear breaking through her anger. Did what? You know what? His voice stayed level, almost gentle. The truck. The accident that wasn't an accident. I don't know what you were. Yes, you do. He pulled out his phone and brought up the screenshot of her emails. Held it out so she could see. I found these. All of them. Your conversations with David about needing me gone. About how divorce would take too long. About finding someone to make it look like an accident. The color drained from her face. She tried to grab the phone, but Evan pulled it back. I also talked to Ray Donovan, he continued. The man you paid $5,000 to cut my brake lines. He was very forthcoming once he realized I wasn't going away. Wrote down everything. Signed it. Lydia's mouth opened and closed. She looked like she might be sick. You can't prove. I can prove everything. You put the phone away. Emails. Receipts. Tom confirmed you asked him for a name. Ray's written confession. It's all documented. I could have gone to the police yesterday. Could have had you arrested before you even knew what was happening. Then why didn't you? Her voice came out hoarse. Because I wanted to hear you say it. Evan stepped closer. I wanted you to look me in the eye and admit what you tried to do. No more lies, Lydia. No more pretending. She was shaking now, her arms wrapped around herself. For a moment, he thought she might cry. But then something hardened in her expression. Fine. The word came out sharp and cold. Yes. I wanted you gone. Dead. Out of my life, so I could finally breathe again. So Nora and I could leave this place and actually live instead of just existing. You were going to orphan our daughter. I was going to free her. Lydia's eyes were wild now, desperate. From you. From this town. From a life you trapped us in. The insurance money would have been enough. We could have gone anywhere. Been anyone. Evan felt something crack inside him. The last piece of whatever affection he'd once held for this woman. You have no idea what you've done. I know exactly what I did. She lifted her chin defiantly. The only thing I regret is that it didn't work. That you're still here, still suffocating me. Suffocating you? His voice rose for the first time, hard and sharp. I gave you everything. A home. A family. I supported your decisions, never demanded you work more than you wanted, never made you feel like you had to be anything other than what you were. But it wasn't enough. I wasn't enough. So you decided to kill me. You never saw me, she shouted. You looked at me every day and never saw that I was dying inside, that I was disappearing. You just kept being, patient and steady and content with this tiny life. And I hated you for it. I hated you for being happy when I couldn't be. The words echoed across the empty lake. A bird cried out somewhere in the distance. Evan took a long breath, letting the rage settle. You're right about one thing. I never saw it. Never saw what you were becoming. That's on me. But everything that happened after, the planning, the lies, the attempt to murder me, that's on you. So what now? Lydia's voice broke. You turn me in? I go prison? Nora loses her mother. Nora already lost her mother. Evan's voice was quiet but final. The woman who used to be her mom, whoever that was, she's gone. What's left is someone who tried to kill her father. Someone who put her own unhappiness above her child's life. Lydia's face crumpled. She sank down onto a nearby bench, her head in her hands. I didn't want it to be like this, she whispered. I just wanted to be free. You chose this. Evan looked down at her, and all he felt was emptiness. You had choices every step of the way. You could have talked to me, could have asked for counseling, could have just left if you were that unhappy. But instead, you chose murder. What are you going to do? I'm going home. He turned away from her. You can do whatever you want. But know this, the police will have everything by tomorrow morning. My lawyer already has copies. If anything happens to me or to Nora, it all comes out. Your life is over, Lydia. Whether you face it now or later is up to you. He started walking back toward the parking lot, leaving her on the bench. Behind him, he heard her start to cry. Deep, wrenching sobs that might have been grief or fear or self-pity. He didn't turn around. When he reached his truck, he saw her still sitting there, a small figure against the vast lake. Part of him, some small, stubborn part, wanted to go back, to comfort her, to try one more time to understand how they'd gotten here. But that part was the old Evan, the one who had trusted and forgiven and believed in second chances. That Evan had died on County Road 14 when his brakes failed and his truck hit that tree. What was left was someone harder, someone who understood that some betrayals couldn't be forgiven. Some lines, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. He got in the truck and drove away. The next day, Lydia packed a bag. Evan watched from the kitchen window as she loaded her car, moving mechanically, her face blank. Nora stood beside him, silent and pale. Where's she going? Nora asked. I don't know. Evan put a hand on his daughter's shoulder. Away from here, I think. Lydia came back inside once, moving through the house like a ghost. She stopped in the doorway and looked at them, really looked as if memorizing the moment. I'm sorry, she said quietly. It wasn't clear who she was apologizing to or what for. And she was gone. Evan didn't stop her. He'd already made one anonymous call to the sheriff's department, tipping them off about Ray Donovan's garage and suggesting they might want to investigate some suspicious repair work. It wouldn't take them long to connect the dots back to Lydia, but he wanted to give her a head start. Not out of mercy. Mercy was something he didn't have for her anymore, but because he wanted her to feel it. The fear of knowing she was being hunted. The panic of trying to run with nowhere to go. The knowledge that everything was closing in. Let her run. Let her feel what he'd felt in those seconds before the crash, when he'd realized he was about to die and couldn't stop it. Dad! Nora's voice pulled him back. Are we going to be okay? Evan looked down at his daughter and saw the fear in her eyes, but also something else. Trust. She trusted him to make this right, to keep them safe. Yes, he said, we're going to be fine. 2 days later, the police came. Sheriff Davidson sat in Evan's living room with a deputy, both of them looking uncomfortable. We need to talk about your wife, Davidson said. Ex-wife, soon, Evan corrected. What about her? We arrested her this morning at a motel outside Madison. She's been charged with conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. The sheriff shifted in his seat. She confessed, gave us everything. The man she hired, how she arranged it, all of it. Says she wants to cooperate. Evan nodded slowly. He felt nothing, no satisfaction, no relief. Just a cold kind of acknowledgement. There's something else, Davidson continued. She claims you threatened her. Says you told her that if she didn't leave town, bad things would happen. That's not true. I didn't think so. The sheriff pulled out a small notebook. But I have to ask, where were you last night between 9 and midnight? The question made Evan's skin prickle. Home. With my daughter. Why? Tom Avery's missing. His wife reported it this morning. Last time anyone saw him was yesterday evening at his shop. Evan kept his face neutral. Tom's my friend. I don't know anything about that. Davidson studied him for a long moment. See, here's the thing. Your wife told us Tom Avery gave her the name of the man who sabotaged your truck. Made him an accessory, whether he meant to be or not. And now he's gone. Maybe he felt guilty. Maybe he ran. Maybe, but the sheriff's tone suggested he didn't believe that. If you hear from him, you let me know. Immediately, after they left, Nora came downstairs from her room. She looked at him with those knowing eyes. You didn't, she said. It wasn't a question. Didn't what? Hurt Mr. Avery. Evan pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. No, honey, I didn't hurt anyone. It was technically true. He hadn't hurt Tom. He'd simply made it clear, during a visit to Tom's garage the previous night, that if Tom talked to the police, if he told them everything he knew, then certain information about Tom's own indiscretions might come to light. Tax irregularities. The occasional off-books work he did for cash. Nothing major, but enough to cause problems. Tom had gotten scared, had said he needed time to think, that he might need to leave town for a while until things blew over. Evan had simply agreed that might be wise. What happened after that, whether Tom actually left or met with some other unfortunate fate, wasn't Evan's concern. He'd given Tom a choice. What Tom did with that choice was his own business. But the truth was, Tom had disappeared, and his garage sat empty. And sometimes, late at night, when he couldn't sleep, Evan would think about the old logging road near County Road 9, about the deep woods back there where people didn't go, about how easy it would be to hide something you didn't want found. He didn't dwell on these thoughts. They were just there, like shadows at the edge of his mind. 3 months later, Evan sat on the dock at Redtail Lake with Nora beside him. It was a cold January afternoon, and the lake had started to ice over at the edges. They had fishing poles, but neither was really trying to catch anything. They were just sitting, being together. Do you miss her? Nora asked quietly. Evan watched a crow land on a nearby post, its black feathers glossy in the weak winter sun. No, I miss who I thought she was. But that person wasn't real. Maybe never was. The lawyer said she'll probably get 15 years. Probably. He testified at Lydia's hearing, laying out everything calmly and methodically. Ray Donovan had testified too, confirming every detail. Lydia's lawyer had tried to paint her as desperate, trapped, mentally unstable. But the evidence was overwhelming. She'd sent Evan one letter from jail. He'd burned it without reading it. Are we safe now? Nora leaned against him, her small warmth cutting through the cold. Evan thought about that question, about Lydia locked up, about Tom Avery's disappearance, officially still under investigation, but growing colder by the day, about the break lines and the emails and how close he'd come to dying on that October afternoon. Yes, he said finally. We're safe now. Dad, Nora's voice was barely a whisper. Did you do something to Mr. Avery? The question hung in the frozen air. Evan looked at his daughter and saw that she already knew the answer, or suspected it. She was too smart not to see the connections, too perceptive not to notice the timing. Mr. Avery made his choices, he said carefully. Same as your mother. People who try to hurt others, who lie and betray trust, they have to live with the consequences. But what were the consequences for him? Evan didn't answer. He just put his arm around her shoulders and held her close. After a moment, Nora's fishing line tugged. She reeled in a small perch, laughing as it flipped and flopped on the end of the line. Can we keep it? She asked. Too small. We have to throw it back. He helped her unhook the fish and slip it back into the water. It disappeared with a quick flash of silver. They sat there until the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and purple. As they packed up their gear and headed back to the truck, Evan felt something he hadn't felt in months. Not happiness exactly, not joy, but a kind of quiet peace. The peace that came from knowing he'd protected his daughter, that he'd faced down those who wanted to harm him and survived, that he'd made the hard choices and could live with them. Some people didn't deserve forgiveness. Some betrayals were too deep to heal. And sometimes, the only way to be safe was to make sure your enemies couldn't hurt you anymore. He wasn't proud of that knowledge, but he wasn't ashamed either. It was simply the truth. 6 months after Lydia's conviction, a hunter found Tom Avery's body deep in the woods near County Road 9, or what was left of it. Animals and time had done their work. The medical examiner couldn't determine cause of death with certainty, but noted evidence consistent with blunt force trauma. The investigation never gained traction. Tom's garage had a history of shady dealings. He owed money to some questionable people. The prevailing theory, was that one of his less savory customers had decided to settle a debt permanently. Sheriff Davidson came to see Evan one last time. "Thought you should know," he said, standing on Evan's porch. "We found Tom." "Yeah, I heard." Evan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Terrible thing." "Yeah." Davidson's eyes were hard, searching. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "Why would I? Tom was my friend." "Was he? Even after he helped your wife try to kill you?" Evan met the sheriff's gaze steadily. "Tom made a mistake. I forgave him for it. If someone else didn't, that's not my problem." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Davidson sighed and turned away. "You're a cold son of a bitch, Calder." "I'm a survivor," Evan corrected. "There's a difference." He watched the sheriff drive away, then closed the door and locked it. Through the window, he could see Nora in the backyard, playing with a neighbor's dog. She was laughing, happy, safe. That was what mattered. Everything else, all the dark truths that lived in the space between what people knew and what they suspected, was just noise. Evan Calder had learned an important lesson that October afternoon when his brakes failed. The world wasn't fair. Good people got hurt. Bad people got away with things. And sometimes, if you wanted to survive, you had to be willing to become the thing you were fighting against. He'd crossed that line, made that choice. And somewhere deep in the woods near County Road 9, there was a small clearing where his old Silverado sat rusted beside an unmarked grave. Tom Avery's garage remained empty, a for lease sign fading in the window. And Lydia was in prison, paying for her choices. Evan had won. He and Nora were safe. The story was over. Except he knew that in quiet moments, late at night when sleep wouldn't come, he'd think about that clearing in the woods, about the weight of the tire iron in his hand, about Tom's eyes going wide with understanding a second too late. He'd think about those things, and he'd remember that survival came with a price, that justice and revenge were sometimes the same thing, that protecting the people you loved meant doing things you could never take back. And he'd accept it, all of it, because some people didn't deserve forgiveness, and some lines, once crossed, defined who you really were. In the end, Evan Calder was a man who survived, a man who protected his daughter, a man who'd looked into the darkness and done what needed to be done. He could live with that. He had to.